Dr. Ricke, thank you so much for joining me today and for answering all of these really neat questions that we've pulled together here. For those who are following along, Dr. Ricke is actually my therapist. I will be transparent with that because I think that we need some more transparency so that we can have a little bit more healing in this space. So, Dr. Ricke, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So, the premise of this book that I'm working on is based on Dr. Rita Eichenstein's work. Her book is called Not What I Expected, and she goes by the 5 stages of grief, coined by Kubler-Ross, but she applies it to special needs parents. So, those of us parents with special needs kids. And she talks about this idea that we go through these grief cycles. So, even though we haven't lost our kids, we've gone through this process where we have this expectation of this healthy, happy child, and we end up with something that we still love our kids, but there's something different. There's a disability or some struggle that our kids are going through, in that we go through the grief cycle through this. So, do you agree with that? And what are your thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting idea and thought, and it seems very plausible. Just in case people aren't familiar with 5 stages of grief, you've got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I kind of refer to it as DABDA: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so what I have seen mainly in my practice is that parents are stuck in denial. The other issue, and I'll go into that in a minute, but the other biggest issue that I've seen psychologically with parents is that they evidence symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Not so much the grief issue. The grief is of accepting, especially if you've had other children before your special needs child, you knew what was to expect, and then all of a sudden you have a child that's not the same. And so, yes, I think it happens much more frequently with people like them, some of the grief issues, but they also have the PTSD because they had a child before that was fine, and now all of a sudden they don't know what to do. They don't know. They're irritable. They're just very anxious and have panic attacks. So I do see that routine basis. But now what I wanted to explain about the denial, which is when I say denial, that means I'm talking about a parent is denying that their children have special needs. It could be autism spectrum. It could be anywhere on the spectrum, and it also could be ADHD. And that, to me, is the worst possible thing that can happen to a child. Because when a parent doesn't accept that their kid needs some help, they don't get the kid help. So guess what? They are dooming that child for their future. And so what I try to look at is one of the most important things when you have a special needs child, for the parents to have a very, very strong marital relationship. The stronger that marital relationship is, the more cohesive they're going to be in getting their child treatment, versus when one parent is in denial and said, nothing's wrong with my kid, I'm not going to have him, stigmatized or this or that. They don't follow through with anything. Especially, to add to it, what makes it doubly worse is if a child with special needs on the autism spectrum also gets diagnosed with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because that diagnosis, so many parents do not want to put their kids on drugs because they think, oh, my child's fine, blah, 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 that it will stigmatize him or her and it will follow them for the rest of their lives. Well, when I look at it, to me, if you're diagnosed with a medical diagnosis and you choose to not treat it, I would consider that abuse. Because what happens in the medications for ADHD is that a person with that cannot pay attention and focus, can't retain information. So study for a test, a spelling test, especially for early elementary, and then they fail it because they can't remember it. When they're on those medications, it allows their brain to actually focus and pay attention and comprehend it, and all of a sudden they start doing better in school. And when we are talking about kids in elementary school, the kids that love school are usually the kids that do very well in school, because teachers tend to be a little bit nicer to those smarter kids. And then you have a kid who's got behavioral problems, and they can't, they're speak because they've got ADHD, and the teacher might not be that nice to them. So the kid already does not like school, and they might only be in kindergarten or first grade. If they get diagnosed with ADHD and they get on that medication, all of a sudden they go from failing tests, like step tests, to making hundreds, and because they understand it, so that increases their tremendously. They start liking school. The teachers are nice to them, and so their chances of success academically are so much greater than a kid who has ADHD. Parents don't treat it. They go through elementary school hating school, becoming the class clown, and they tend to be a high likelihood to drop out of high school. And their life, I mean, it's only because a parent was selfish or didn't want to stigmatize the kid and put them on medication, which to me, I think is tragic.
And I think anyone watching this video sees why I like you and why I've done well with you, because you kind of give it to us straight and don't mince words about it. And you have many years of experience of seeing this, which is very important. You're not just, drawing from feelings here. You've seen this with lots of parents. A couple of things that you said, I actually have a family member who was severely ADHD and did really struggle. And I remember he was placed on some medicine for a little while. And his mom really struggled with whether or not to do that. I mean, she was literally ill with the thought of harming her child by giving him medication, but she felt like it was the right thing to do because it was so severe. And she did give him medicine, and he came to her, and he was a little guy, and he came back to her and said, "Mom, I feel like I'm not crazy anymore." And like we just all cried. We just like, oh.
What happens, they feel like they're a normal kid again. And just a really quick example, I've worked with a guy who was in college, and his dad was an attorney, and he thought he had ADHD in high school because he struggled. He was really smart, but all of a sudden he was having trouble in like 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And his parents said, "You don't have an issue. You're not taking medication." He went away to college in New York City and got tested and evaluated and put on medication, and it changed his life. Well, we had a session when he came home for the break with his father. His mother had passed away, and him, and he flipped out. His father will have nothing to do with his dad because he feels like his dad ruined his life growing up to prevent him from having the opportunities that he could have had. So he absolutely has nothing to do with his son, his dad now, which is very sad, and nobody wants that to happen.
That's really tough. But yeah, it's good to think about that. What are we preventing our kids from getting? Because it's not the issue of whether a child should have medicine. It's the issue of, are you seeking treatment for a child who needs treatment? And that could be a number of different types of treatment. We've explored alternative therapy for our son who has autism, and that has been the best thing we ever could have done. So I think whether it's medication or whether it's something different, it's just this idea that if our kids need help with an invisible disability, especially, that we need to be open to seeking whatever that help is that they need. And you're also touching on this idea of labeling, which is it's like a trigger word in the disabled community. Even the word disabled is a triggering word, but this idea of putting a label on a child. And I've seen recently on Instagram, parents are posting things like, "Do you know why I'm seeking a label for my child? Because if I don't, you will. And your label is going to be, oh, she's lazy. Oh, she's dumb. Oh, she's just being difficult. Oh, this, and this." Whereas if you get an actual medical label for a child, you realize, oh, no, they're actually autistic or they have ADHD, and there's actual treatment for that child that can help them. And that, to me, that's a very freeing thing to offer your child, is an explanation for why they're struggling with this or that, and then hope that there are treatments that can help them not struggle so much.
Yes. Well, and there are, over the past 10 years, so much more research. There's been much more funding, for ABA, like people that are actual therapists trained to work with autism, and the different, many more services available now than used to be. And people need to take advantage of that and not feel bad doing that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even people my age, I think about what kids went through in school or what we heard about in school. None of this treatment was an option. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's available only came out in the past 10 years. So what we think of as treatment may not be what's available out there for our kids today. And so getting out of that mindset of, oh, it's going to look like this, and I don't want that. I don't want special need. I don't want my kid in special needs class. I don't want my kid in special ed. We have these stigmas associated with a lot of this as adults. And what I've learned through you and through experience with my kid is that it is not like that today at all. It's just not. The world is very different today. And I don't have to hold on to my preconceived ideas and my stress about what it's going to look like, that I can just be open to what our experience is going to be as parents of him. His life is going to be different than our lives, and I have to be open to what he needs. Okay, so I wanted to ask you this because I think the book I'm writing is a faith-based book for parents with special needs kids. And as such, I expect most readers and a lot of people that might be tuning into this recording are going to be Christians. And there's lots of different denominations of Christians who all have different backgrounds. What I have seen among friends that are going through this is that there is maybe more of a hesitancy to seek professional help from a psychologist versus going to the church pastor or leader, deacon, whoever's assigned within the church to help. So it seems like as Christians, we're kind of funneled into, back into the church to get that help. As a professional, what would you say about that? When do we need to seek professional help for ourselves as parents? So we're struggling with the emotions, we're struggling with how to deal with the things going on. When do we seek you and someone like you versus just someone within our church that's, handling this more as a calling than as a profession?
The first thing I wanted to mention is, that is a very good point. And the professionals in the religious Christianity organizations that I am familiar with, that I've worked with, are not trained the same way as a psychologist or a psychiatrist is to deal with issues. And a huge example of, I had a woman who was being beaten and battered by her husband, and she went to her pastor and tried to tell him, and instead he told her, be a better wife, it's your fault. And the entire community of the church ostracized her, took his side. She had been going to that church her entire life, and she was devastated. And so I would be very cautious. You should check it out. There's a lot of Christian counselors that are very, very good and that are not going to force those biases, because the biggest problem is there's going to be biases in some of the Christian-based counseling versus a professional that's trained to be, that's trained like through graduate school, like as a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, marriage and family therapist. They have more education and they're trained for it. But I would seek help when you feel like everything's a struggle. You can't get out of bed anymore. You're depressed. You're sad. You have no motivation. Those would be reasons. If you're not able to function the way you normally would function, that is when I would seek professional help. And you might start with the Christian counselor in your church, but you might discover that they're not really helping and they're not listening to you because they're preaching to you, because that's what I've heard the most, the feedback I've gotten. And I also had a rape victim, because I work with a lot of victims of violent crime, that their Christian counselor made her pray for the assailant, the perpetrator. She had to pray during the session for his soul to be saved. And she just flipped out and left, and I couldn't blame for that. But but anyway, it's everybody's personal choice. But when you are feeling like you can't function anymore, you're not up to par, it's better to be safe than sorry. And start with a therapist, meet a psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever, and in 3 or 4 sessions might be fine, or it might last months and years. It depends on what is going on with you and getting in touch with what is going on.
What is the difference between a psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, therapist? There's a lot of different terms here. What's really the difference between them?
The difference is education. So let's start with the psychologist, which is what I am. To be called a psychologist, a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida and in any state in our country, you have to have a doctoral degree, meaning a doctorate of philosophy, a PhD, or a PhD, which is a doctorate in psychology. So you have 4 years undergraduate psych major, 2 years psych major, and then 4 to 5 years finishing your doctoral program. In addition to that, you have a master's thesis, which is a big research project, and a doctoral dissertation, which is a huge research project where you actually do it yourself. A psychiatrist goes to med school, and they probably make biology or chemistry. So they're there for 4 years. They go to med 4 to 5 years, and then they do like a residency. But before their residency, their last 2 years of med school, they specialize in psychiatry. So they are pretty much only spending 2 years biologically of the brain, looking at the brain. So that is why psychiatrists mainly prescribe medication. They rarely do therapy. They're not trained to. They're trained to be a physician. They're learning about the brain and neurotransmitters and what medications will help deal with depression, with psychosis, anxiety disorder. Now, as a therapist, or let's call it a counselor, to be a licensed counselor, you have to have at least a master's degree. So you only have 1 to 2 years post undergrad to be a licensed. It could be a mental health counselor, a social worker, but you can't call yourself a licensed something without a counselor, a licensed therapist, unless you have a master's degree and you pass a licensing exam. But their education is only 2 years post-undergrad versus 6 years PhD, PsyD, 6 years psychiatry.
Wow. Okay.
So it's pretty much the education.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So that helps us know kind of what we're looking for. One of the things I did when I first met you, and I didn't know if I was offending you when I did this, but I did it. I apologized, and then I did it. I asked you if you were a Christian, and I did that because I knew I needed to talk with someone, and I knew that as a parent, I did not have all the tools in my toolkit to deal with what was going on. The way I was trained as a parent was not the way I needed to work with my son, and was not how I needed to handle myself. And so, but I also knew that there were things I didn't want. I didn't want to go to what I would consider like a new age therapist. And I didn't want to, someone to tell me just to go, meditate or do yoga or, climb a mountain or something. I wanted something different than that. And so, and I also wanted someone who respected the fact that I am a Christian and I'm praying about things, and that's a big part of our lives. So I asked you in our first session, "Are you a Christian?" And I was happy with your answer, and we kept moving. But is that something that is okay for us to ask when we meet with a new psychologist or therapist?
Absolutely, and I would probably do that because you're the consumer. You are consuming product, so you deserve to know everything about that person. So when you're talking to them about making the first appointment, I would ask them. I mean, I have no qualms about it. I'm raised Catholic. I tell people I was raised Catholic. My kids Catholic. That's what I practice. I mean, because Catholics, even though we're in the Christian community, we still call ourselves that. Versus and I would want to know if somebody wanted a psychologist or therapist that was made that all they did was counseling. I'd want you to tell me that up front, and I would say no. That all I do, I work with lots of Jews. So that way, you're being transparent and you're finding out what and you can always start with the Christian counselor. And if you don't feel like you're getting anywhere, do your research and find else, but they can be Christian, Catholic, religious, their own way, but just not pray in a session with you.
Right. I had a Christian counselor. No, he was a psychologist, but he was Christian. He practiced a specific type of Christian therapy, and I had wonderful success with him. And went to him for months and really felt very good about what was happening. I felt relieved of a lot of issues going on at the time, and that was that. He ended up moving. So when I had Gordon and we needed more help, I didn't have him, and so I reached out to you. But for those that are watching, I personally have had success in both areas, and so I think it is a matter of what you need at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned PTSD. I'm glad you mentioned that. It was actually on my mind this morning. There are a lot of interesting statistics about that, especially among autism parents. And they say that the rate of PTSD among autism parents is even higher than people who go to war and come back because they're actually trained to go to war.
Yes. No, I would totally agree with that. You are trained to be military. It's what you get exposed to that you weren't trained. But when you have a special needs kid, it's every single day.
Yeah, it never lets up. It never lets up.
Irritability that you might develop, the shortness of your attention span, or just the anxiety that you experience is
right.
tough.
And the feeling that you're just not doing it right, that you're messing up your kid's life, who knows what's going on with your family, between you and your spouse. I know I went through a period of depression many years ago that was unrelated to this, and I ended up going through it alone. It was me and God, and that was it. And I don't recommend that, but that's how I went through that. That was pretty rough.
I encourage people to find a support group, to find support. You can't do it alone. The best way to ward off the PTSD is to have other people, have a support system, have a network of people that you can talk to that understand what you're going through, that can relate to what you've been through, and that can relate to what you're dealing with on a regular daily basis. Those would be some practical tips.
Yes. And unfortunately, that is often not going to be your friend group. It is not going to be your family, and it is not going to be your church group because they don't have kids like yours. They're not dealing with what you're dealing with, and they just cannot relate. They cannot relate. And so you have to find people who are going through what you're going through. And that's the hardest thing. But we have the internet. We have Facebook groups. We have resources that our parents didn't have and their parents didn't have. So that's to me.
So I would utilize those. And if your child is attending a special school for special needs kids, and those places I would encourage the principal or whatever to organize a support group, because at least they're in the community. You could be face to face with the people. Even if it's weekly, whether you have to go every week or not, usually those things are free, a support group.
I really like that idea. We had something special in Tallahassee called Hang Tough. We don't have that here in Lake City. And when you're going to therapy, the therapist can't talk about other kids. You can't be in the room with them. So even though you're in the same place, you're very disjointed. So I love that idea about encouraging the managers and the doctors to just allow a space for parents to show up and be a support group. That's a really great idea. So what are some other practical tips? I know that I came to you when I reached the phase of anger because I felt like I could handle the other stuff. But when I started getting angry at my kid, that was enough. When it started impacting him and our family, I was done, and I had no way of fixing that. I didn't know what to do. And so I came to you, and one of the things you taught me was angry letter writing.
Yes. So the other thing that most people don't know this, but a lot of depression is based on unresolved to. So you have this anger you're not dealing with, and you need to learn to let it go and let it out without hurting anybody, without hurting your kids, without hurting yourself, without hurting children. So anger writing, I get people to 5 minutes and just sit down and write a letter, but don't do it on your computer. Do it hand to hand, hand on paper, and 5 minutes, and you just free associate. You say what you need to say. You describe what you're angry about, and that alarm goes off. You tear it up and you throw it away, and you empower yourself. Think purging your soul. Now, for kids, when your child is angry, and I can't remember if I had you do this, Gordon, or not, is I get people to do a mad pillow. That you get a white pillowcase, and the parent can design a mad face and maybe sketch it on the pillow, but get the child themselves with waterproof marker, actually color it in. And when they're angry, they go to their room and punch their pillow, and nobody's going to get hurt, and nobody's going to get their feelings hurt, and it helps them let it out in a healthy way. Because they're doing the drawing themselves, they're going to be more connected to it and more willing to use it.
I like that idea. I like
and
that.
A lot of people, the kids that have issues, they do, especially like when parents are getting through a divorce, they're really angry. It really helps. But the special needs kids too, it works. And they love it. They love having a mad pillow. I had one little boy that made his mom do a mad pillow too. They could have one together.
You need one too, Mom. I like that. You need one too. So one thing that got me about the angry letter writing is that you tear it up and you throw it away. And
you don't reread it, but you don't want to put it back into your brain. You're purging it from your soul.
And something that I shared with you that I don't think you realized was that we in the Christian community are encouraged to journal, to do journal writing. And you said something about that. Share that here.
Yes, what I try to recommend my patients do for journal writing is not the bad stuff. Angry writing is bad stuff. Journal writing is when you had a great day, you had a great day with your kid, you write about it, and you keep that. And when you're having a bad day, you go to your journal and you read, oh, I had a great day. So it gives you hope to move on and to be hopeful for that day and realize tomorrow's another day, tomorrow's another day. Do not journal bad stuff, because you don't need to be reminded of bad stuff. Right? You write about that, you tear it up, you throw it away. So, yeah, I forgot about making that distinction.
I think that's a really important distinction, because we're basically told just to write everything down, and then you go back and you read it. And the thing is, when you go back and read it, you've probably already forgotten about it, because
and you have it back in your brain to be depressed again.
You don't. I mean, there is a mercy. Right.
You hope.
Right. You want the good memories. I mean, God gives us the mercy of forgetfulness. And there's a lot of things that we do forget, and it's on purpose. There's a reason for it, and we don't need to shove it back in down the road. So yeah, I really like the idea of the angry letter writing. Do you have any other quick tips that you can lay on us here for any of the DABDA phases?
Mainly the denial. If you know of a parent's in denial, I know that a lot of people think depression is the worst, but really the denial is the worst, because denial means your child's not getting help, your child's not getting treatment. Depression, just surround yourself with others like-minded that understand what you're going through. The other thing, I know a lot of people are doing virtual therapy now, and I would encourage, that's the only way to do it. That's okay. But if they're actually in the session, in the therapist's office, they have different boundaries, different rules. They're out of their own house. So they might be better able to adjust to the change, because they need to learn to change and not just always be at home. I think if they can do a session in person with the behavioral analyst or whoever that's trained to work with the autism, it's going to be much more effective, because rules are different in a therapy office, rules that are at home. Because the virtual thing is going to be at home.
Right. And it's also hard to talk about your kid when he's in the other room.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, this was useful.
Yes, absolutely. What's that?
Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry for the audio issues with our Zoom.
No, it's fine. I appreciate all of your help in the past and today. All of it. Thank you very much, Dr. Ricke. I appreciate your time. Take care.
All right, too. Bye.
Bye.